Okay, all right. I think we're started here. So welcome everybody to the Pause and Select production podcast. This is only for patrons. So what we're going to be doing here is, as requested, I'm going to be covering any of the videos people request, and I'll probably just like go through the catalog after that. We didn't really get anybody who. I know that I was going to cover what ended up having the most requests, but we didn't get anyone that had the most requests. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be covering the ones that have been requested, but in chronological order. So the first one is actually the most recent one, and that was Sam Ham, who requested that I take a look and talk about the Tonikawa video. And then after that, we're going to be doing Najbeb, who wanted me to look at Netoyome. And then the last one is going to be Matt Wismer, who wanted me to look at I believe it was the Apocalypse videos, or it was one of the Isekai ones, maybe. I'll remember it when I get to it. I remember the question had a lot of different things asking. So, okay. So, of course, as always, well, not as always, this is the first episode, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the exact request in case if there are any specifics, so that way I can keep in mind exactly what it is I should remember. So, what Sam requested was, I want to nominate the Tonikawa video. The reason being that I'm interested in what you did with the editing of the manga over the B-roll footage, i.e. how you handled editing the manga panels onto the paper, if you were working with digital or physical camera shake with the macro footage, and how that worked into mapping the panels onto the paper seamlessly, and what was your overall philosophy of thought when it came to picking what show, why to show it, and when to do so. That's my suggestion. All right. So this is being recorded as video in case if anybody wants to watch it as video, while you're watching it. But it is also going to be recorded, as audio. So you can listen to it as audio if you're in any sort of situation. So I'm going to be editing it as cleanly as I can with regards to both video and audio. Might not be the fanciest thing, but hopefully you find it interesting. I'm going to try and make it as interesting as I can. Think of this more as a commentary track where I go through all my videos, but hopefully a commentary track that is not so much a particularly kind of like ego thing, but looking with regards to process and production, but also some of the arguments and so on and so forth. So, all right, let's go into Tonikawa and Inversion of Love. So let's get this started. I'm gonna just sync it up here. So let me get some context out here first, right? So why Tonikawa? What started it? What led to it? So this video initially came about as a result of a conversation I had with Roger Smith 2004, who's another AniTuber, as well as Achan, who does music, and they were having sort of issues with some of the takes with regards to like Tonikawa being a sort of traditionalist marriage or birther sort of propaganda piece, I believe it was. And I had an offhand comment about like, well, it just seems like junai to me, right? And so like that's the term I use, junai. And it's a very common term, but it's actually a term that junai kind of fell out of overall favor as something to be analyzed and discussed, even though it still retains a pretty significant base as something to be sold. And so what I mean by that, it's used largely colloquially nowadays. If you go onto a lot of website and sort of database places, you're going to see Junai come up a lot. It's going to come up a lot in terms of tags. But when we're talking about it with regards to it as a genre or perhaps a sort of system or a style, like as a sort of like K, it doesn't really come up that often anymore as something that's really studied. It really kind of petered out in a few ways once the sort of as you can say, the sort of like nichijou-kei, or like ordinary types, or kuki-kei, or like air types, or kirara-kei, or the manga time kirara types. When those sorts of stories started to really incorporate a lot more of their romantic elements into this sort of everydayness, the idea of Junai didn't really sort of have much of a strong leg anymore with regards to being like a fully fledged genre of its own. It was sort of relegated to being a sort of a side character, in my observations, side character to a lot of other things. Now people want to talk more about ordinariness and everydayness and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, people who are a lot more familiar or who have been following this for a very long time might might rightly disagree with my take on that. They might say, well, no, Joe, there actually is still quite a bit of Junai left, and you're just not looking hard enough, and you're stupid, and so on and so forth, which could be true. But from my perspective, the Tonikawa seemed very much drawing upon that particular kind of lineage of sorts. And so I talked about it in that context, or at least I wanted to talk about it in that context, because I felt like not a lot of people really this felt like one of those situations where people intuitively understood what the feeling was, what the vibe was, but they couldn't really put their finger on it because it really isn't a term that's talked about too much, at least over here. I mean, we've got a lot of talk about like sekai kei and isekai, and you've got super sentai, all that kind of stuff. You've got mahou shoujo, you got all these different types, right, that have been brought over and discussed. But Junai is one of those very humbling topics, in a sense. Junai is an incredibly humbling topic in the sense that even though it's there and you can see it and you can talk about it and you can kind of intuitively understand a lot of things about it, you realize just how big it was. And you realize just how little has been discussed about it. And yet, it's this massive, absolutely titanic thing that has just been completely under discussed in many circles, in most circles. Primarily because it was often relegated to being something less sexy as a topic of discussion. It's like, oh, it's just like normie shit. It's just normie conventions, so on and so forth. But you can see its DNA really writhe through a lot of anime and manga. And so it's a very humbling experience thinking about Junai, pure love, and so on and so forth in that context, because it does give you a lot of insight as to like, oh, there's so much more you can talk about, so much more can be discussed, and so on and so forth. Haven't really hit or exhausted any of it. And so let's kind of take a look. Let's get this started here. I'm just gonna say click so I can get the multicam for it set up. So click. All right. So I got the spoilers: Tail the Bamboo Cutter, Hide the Combat Butler, Suzuka. Yeah, Suzuka. Oh, I forgot to put a space between Hide the Combat Butler and Kimi no Irumachi. Okay, that's my bad. What? Hope you guys like the the pink lighting in the background. Yeah, so when I wrote this the overall general details of this camera here, this was shot in a G85. I believe I put the dynamic range to +5 and the contrast to -5 on Cinity. I was running a very standard 3-key lighting system, everything at the lowest settings possible, lowest intensity possible, so it doesn't blast light everywhere. But I was doing a very sort of standard 3-point light, except for the light in the back. The light in the back, which is the purple light, which is just a standard LED light over there that I got for about $14. It's a standard E26 light. It's a Nui light that lets you, change the color to whatever it is you want. And so I changed it to purple. The original footage looked a lot more muted than this, but effectively what I did was I sort of intensified and played around with the colors a little bit more in color correction after correcting for the white balance. and we got that. And I think that was the right color to go with. Ultimately, it really only worked out, in my opinion, primarily because I was wearing a blue shirt at the time. If I was wearing any other shirt that was requiring any other base color other than blue and red, because we're working with pink and purple, right? I feel like it would have just looked like I was green screened in, because the light would have reflected off weirdly to the point where the color, I would have done a lot more with color correction. So I guess my suggestion in the future for anybody who wants to do like sort of like very specific color things is to make sure that whatever you're wearing matches or complements the color scheme you want to go for with regards to your lighting. So let's go with that. Let's move on.
Because I'm in the mood for love, baby.
Very cringy joke.
Tonikaku Kawaii is a pure love romance
yeah,
story
okay,
that
so
inverts
Tonikaku
the
Kawaii
mainstream premise of
is a
what we
pure love
usually
romance
think about
story.
when we talk
So if you take a look at the way that the thing, so this is a very sort of standard thing that I really like to do, right? So what I do is I simply just have the text, and then I have a yeah, it just generates a stroke, and then I usually change the stroke size based upon however long or big I need it to be. It's just not in After Effects where I generate a stroke size, and then I use rough and edges. I have a very specific set of numbers for what I have for rough and edges. So if you want this particular look, I'm more than happy to give it to you. I just don't have it off the top of my head. But I have that, and then I just copy and paste the rough and edge line, put it on top as the mask, so it reveals at the same time it strokes, and so on and so forth. It is kind of funny though, in a weird way, because if you look very closely here, when it sort of moves in, when it slides in from the bottom, you can actually see the mask catch the catch the top of the next line here. There's a little bit at the top here, right under the A in kawaii. So that's really unfortunate. I didn't notice that until it actually went up and YouTube blared that in my face. So that's unfortunate.
Is a pure love romance story that inverts the mainstream premise of what we usually think about when we talk about
Junai. So what's that? Okay, so I can see that there's a little bit of black that's sort of bleeding up from the bottom here, just peeking up here. That's very unfortunate. That usually happens if you let it accelerate a bit too much. So just got to be a little bit careful about that.
So what's that? If you ever look for romance manga,
all right. So
you might come across.
Okay, so we got B-roll. So we got a little bit of a B-roll. I can see the wood floor peeking through the bottom here. The paper seems a little bit bright, but I think I had the paper pretty bright for the rest of it, primarily to make it easier for certain things to stand out. So yeah, so this one this one was intentional, I think. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, I understand. Yeah, so essentially what happened was I was running this, I believe, on the 12 to 60 millimeter camera lens. And so this is not so this zoom, this sort of snap or crash zoom was not actually something that happened in post. This happened actually in the camera lens itself. I was using the 12 to 60 millimeter, and you can tell right away that this was a natural zoom because the lighting on the paper got much darker. Because one of the rule of thumb is that as you get closer, much closer to the object, as you zoom in or as you get closer with your shooting macro, what you're going to have to deal with is you're going to have to deal with a lot more required lighting to get the same kind of exposure level. So that's essentially what happened. I didn't account for the change in lighting. So what ended up happening was the paper got darker. So that's how you know that the transition was natural.
Means pure love.
Okay, so this was just a standard motion. This was a standard camera track.
For the most part, it's used colloquially. Here, it's mentioned.
All right, so we got a standard camera track, and then we've got a transition to Shonan Junai Gumi, which is the Onizuka prequel, the Great Teacher Onizuka prequel. This particular section really only lasted for about
as part of
3 seconds, which is very unfortunate because there's a lot of stuff that happens in this specific part here. They got the signs out, and then, they're sort of lean in from the frame. They're blinking, all that kind of stuff. It gives a nice sense of like body and form. I am a little bit, unfortunately, a little bit disappointed. I did not do a proper blur onto this image to sort of match up with the blur of the images around it. So it looks very clearly like it was put in there, you know? It doesn't feel like it blends in very well with the paper. So that's my bad there. It's something that I didn't really notice as I was editing it, but now that I'm looking back at it now with a more critical eye, I'm noticing it a lot more. Okay, so we snap back.
Another example where the thread poster is
Okay, so then we got recommendations
for more
that. So
stories. In general,
I think one of the things that so we got we got the transition because I couldn't figure out a way to transition it well, so I just did a cross dissolve.
Steadfast.
I did a cross dissolve with a free sound effect, trolley sound effect in the background, which allows me to just have that kind of roll, and I just extended it to be just the exact amount so it looks like I'm actually rolling it. But no, there's no sound there. I just added a sound effect. Okay. Okay, so yeah, these are, I think, probably no, they're not an overlay. I think they just might have been no, they're not multiplied. I can see through them. It might have been overlay. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what I did, but anyhow, it's just the layer style. I know that.
But let's hang on that last one.
So, okay, so the question becomes here, how do you track onto when stuff is moving like this? This is very simple. This is just a simple camera track, as long as the camera has something to latch onto the entire time, you'll be able to track on it pretty easily. This is very easy when you're working with something like a Japanese character in the backing. It's very easy because Japanese characters are very distinct. When you're working with, say, if your whole field looks like kanji, all it takes for After Effects to really get a good lock is for it to recognize that there's, some particular shape there. And kanji is really good at that. So it can lock on to a certain series of radicals, and boom, all of a sudden you've got the right, place to set up some render points. So this is just some simple After Effects camera tracking.
Because it brings up essential.
One of the things that I think that's
untainted from what?
Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important with regards to this video, right, is that this video isn't very technically complex. It isn't technically complex in the sense that there's a lot of moving parts that all of a sudden make it difficult, but it is computationally complex. There's a lot of processing and then putting it into other comps and then processing that. There's a lot of that happened. And so this kind of video editing really benefits from, or this kind of format really benefits from having a better computer. But if you know how to use proxies and edit with proxies, or if you know how to comp and pre-comp, so if you're a very patient editor, you can get away with a lot of this stuff really easily.
In the early 2000s, there was a flurry of romance stories for men and women where characters fell in love.
Okay, so this is the first one here.
They call it
Hatsukoi. So the manga that I used for this section here is literally called Hatsukoi. It was Mizuki Kawashita's, I believe, 2007, 2008 manga Hatsukoi, and it's a story about all different high schoolers falling in love in different ways for the first time. And there was an anime adaptation that covered a few chapters, but I don't think it was particularly very popular. But Hatsukoi, first love, this sort of first, doki doki first meeting kind of thing, is a very common thing with Junai stories. So you'll see them a lot. I had the character and her hair move in the background because all of her hair was on a separate layer, because I thought that I was going to be I thought I was really going to be honing in on that section a little bit more, but it turns out I didn't. I didn't really end up using that section as much as I thought I wanted to. So yeah, that was pretty much it. Once again, this is just held entirely by camera tracking, and all of it is put on a multiply.
You got some big Junai energy.
And then, so what we see here is we see a really fast, fast whip onto another part. So this part is actually natural. There's no real trick to this part. So what happens is there's only about a few frames. There's only about a few frames where you have to track everything manually. So what you do is you essentially set the camera track to track most of it until the blur kicks in, until the motion blur kicks in with the pan, because then After Effects is really unable to track any of that. So what you do is you do it entirely by hand, but it's really only about 6, 7, 8 frames that you have to do it by hand. So you kind of just run it over and over again until it looks natural, and it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to look perfect because it just has to look natural or natural enough, because most people won't really pay attention to how it's going to sort of like whip unless they're really looking for it.
And the romantic
So if you really, really look for it, you'll see that like it jittered slightly little bit, but ultimately doesn't really matter. Okay, so then this was Fruits Baskets. Fruits Baskets, once again, I separated the hair, redrew a bunch of the hair. Didn't really end up using it. Didn't really zoom in as much as I wanted to.
Cannot be fully formed.
So this was Shinshin. So this was Shinshi Domei Cross, which is it's by the same mangaka as Fullmoon wo Skashite. I really love this manga. But once again, so this is something I like to do, right? Where I like to use I like to use what I show as examples of what I'm talking about. So sometimes people say, well, where are your examples? What's an example? Well, just look at my screen. I'll try and use an example, and if the example doesn't make sense, then you might say, well, what do you mean by that show or thing at that moment? So this is Shinshi Domei Cross, which is another Junai story.
Kind of ends there. From here, the word Junai had a different
Zoom in.
connotation. It was a genre.
So this was very simple. Once again, this is very simple. This is so this is an object that's in 3D in After Effects, which is just attached to a camera track somewhere. It's on paper, very simple. It's on paper. It's multiplied. The only thing that I did that's a little bit different was the wiggle. So there's a wiggle on here. And so one of the things you might want to know is, the wiggle expression will change the range upon which a particular thing sort of jumps up and down within a particular range and a particular frequency. So if you use the wiggle expression a lot, you'll ultimately develop a sort of feel for like what certain values are in After Effects. You can always find out what it is. If you look up the wiggle effects in After Effects, it's a very helpful tool if you want to have that little bit of movement.
Its own,
so the camera shake is not using the wiggle expression. It is actually using I believe it was a Jarl Deadpool preset, which he posted as free and for anyone to use, because it gives a very nice natural camera movement. So here's the little trick. Here's the little sneaky trick. How was I able to track this so well when there's jittering camera? Well, it wasn't jittery. It was completely smooth, but I was able to set down a camera position and rotation preset using Yaro's Deadpool preset to make it look like organic camera movement. So there's the little trick.
Keyword development of romantic relationships becomes the focal point.
Okay.
Scholar Alice Friedman talks a bit about
Debating Otaku in Contemporary Japan. Absolutely phenomenal book. I think this is really sort of like the other book that a lot of people kind of miss out on. Like, a lot of people talk about the Moe Manifesto, which is a great book, but this is also like the other book that a lot of people kind of miss out on. This is the more like Big Brother scholarly kind of book, in my opinion, compared to the Moe Manifesto, in that like it has a lot more sort of pointed arguments, but it also talks about a lot more very specific subjects. It goes a lot more into Densho Otoko, which was a huge, completely watershed moment for otaku and otaku PR in a lot of senses. So this is a really fascinating book if you want to understand what like the sort of like Zero Nendai takes on otaku were like.
When these romantic relationships
are
solidified, these stories.
So this movement around the Debating Otaku in Contemporary Japan sheet was done using a very small motorized slider. It was a sort of like free no-wheel motorized slider that just set the wheels out and then just sort of spun around the piece of paper. So
And
then I think I was able to track the corner points. Yeah, the corner points, and then use that as a framework, or like as an anchor point for the quote here. So it sort of spins around.
can become soiled.
And as always, God always got to have shadows. Shadows are one of those very small things that are incredibly easy. They're incredibly easy to put in, and they make all of the things you add have a lot more weight to them. They feel like they have a lot more weight to them. If this didn't have a shadow, it would have just looked like it would have just looked really like it would have looked really weightless and missing something. And so like a shadow gives it a little bit more, like it feels like it's there a little bit more.
With more mundane,
you can get away with a lot of things if you have shadows. Now, you don't have to have like really obvious and obnoxious shadows, but they can be really helpful.
Casual dating shit. And they were big. In the early 2000s, one of the best-selling books in Japan was a pure love story.
Yep.
It was
Katayama Koichi's. I had like a image, and then it sort of like panned and rotated out, but I didn't really like that. It didn't really look very good. But thanks to Sheep's help, I was able to get a copy of the film version of Sekai. Okay, there we go. I forgot the name there. Sekai no Chushin de Ai o Sakebu. Yeah, Socrates or Socrates in Love. This shot was very simple. I know both Shaves and Steven thought that this shot was very like impressive in a lot of ways, and I appreciate their compliment. But this was actually a fairly simple thing to pull off. So the main thing here, right, is what you got to do. So once again, this is camera track, right? Very simple. This is camera track, and then it's a lot of it is just finagling with the 3D plane, to the point where it looks like it is exactly in line with the glass panel. So once it's exactly in line with the glass panel, you got that. So now the question becomes, okay, well, what do you do with the bars, right? Because, one, you got the bars, and so if you're going to keep the bars there, then how do you move the glass panel with the bar? Then how do you move the object with the bar? And two, these bars are clearly they're clearly captured in 3D, so you can't just like move the bars, because then it'll cut stuff off. And how do you do that? Well, it's actually very simple, because this scene sort of pans at a very consistent rate. While you can just mask all the stuff out around the bars and then move the points at a very consistent rate. And as a result, what'll happen is it'll look like it's right there, and it'll just keep the bars in mind. And the exact same thing is with the desks at the bottom. The desks at the bottom are literally just a mirror of the object at the top. But once again, the masks are completely different. You just mask that part out, and then you just slowly change the details of the mask as it moves through space, as it's moving through the clip, and voila. It's a very easy thing to do. But it was a lot of fun.
Central to it, domestic life or the lack thereof. Though we do have examples of love stories,
we got Suzuka,
romantic relationships alongside the subsequent domestic.
I probably could have done a lot more with Suzuka. I probably should have actually just had her jump over. I wanted to sort of like do the glide, but then I realized that we didn't really look very good, so probably should have her jump over.
Life, the pure love mentality more so is that characters have.
Then we got Kimi no Todoke. Really didn't use Kimi no Todoke particularly well. I feel like I could have done it in another way,
Finding out.
Didn't really like that. Once again, we got a problem where the paper blur is different from the actual asset blur, the actual composition blur. So I should have paid more attention to the composition blur there.
And the story's end, because everything after that is just unromantic and boring. That was the idea. Sometimes it backfired horribly. We sometimes forget that one of the big Junai stories was.
So Densho Otoko was a completely, it's an absolutely massive piece of otaku. Well, it isn't really otaku media in a lot of senses. It affected otaku, but it was largely rejected by many otaku. It was one of the big catalysts for what Toru Honda called the 2D love revolution, and this idea of love capitalism. This idea that otaku are seemingly only good because of them as like consumers of products, right? And the mainstream perspective was that all otaku had to do was that all they had to do was they had to stop consuming these anime and manga products, and instead they had to consume like mainstream products, and then they'll just be regular parts of society. They'll be accepted. We love otaku now. That was the idea, and Toru Honda didn't really like that. A lot of otaku didn't like that.
Episode drew, and I quote, 25.5.
So this is funny. A lot of people talk about so yeah, I got two people talking about the sort of second no chushin de scene that are like, oh wow, you were able to get it in the glass, and then, it's got the bars and the shadows and so on. But nobody has mentioned this scene, which was actually a little bit more complicated to pull off, because there was a mirror. So this is reflected in the glass, which has to be flipped over, but there's something happens, right? So like the motion when you flip over the thing, in the motion, it doesn't track up like exactly right. It feels a little bit off. So what you do is you have to like pre-comp, and then you flip. So you flip, you pre-comp, you track, you carry over the position data, and that's what you got. And nobody really notices the shadow, but there's a shadow here that gets developed. But if you'll take a look at the video, you'll see it again.
National audience. To many, the story
probably should have highlighted the 25.
The otaku grew out of their otakudom by falling in love, because, well, that's what's supposed to happen.
So I ended up using the film. I talked to Gil about this, actually. I ended up using the film rather than the TV show, because the film just looks a lot better. They're both densha otoko, and they both have the same general trajectory. But man, the film looks a lot better than the TV show does. I know I'm talking about the TV show, but god damn.
And in Densha Otoko, once their relationship solidified, the story just ends, because now they gotta navigate mundane life. And
yep.
You don't want to see that, right? In fact, it made the term moe so ubiquitous.
Kaiichiro Morikawa talks a little bit about this as well.
The word altogether, out of disgust.
Yeah, I thought this part was really cringy, so I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to handle this in editing. I thought it was really cringy.
Well, it's a pure love show, right? That argues that the earnest, honest purity of pure love.
Okay. Yeah, we got moon, and then so we got a match cut. So I match cut down.
It becomes a sort of mutation,
a new galaxy. So this is a scene that I'm somewhat glad, actually. I'm actually somewhat glad that nobody noticed this particular scene, because if you watch Tonikawa, this scene doesn't actually play out like this. It's actually a pan down. What I ended up doing was I ended up masking the fireworks out and then holding them in place, but they ended up moving a little bit faster than I thought they would be. So as a result, it felt like the fireworks were like going up a little too quickly. But yeah, this was a scene that I had completely manufactured on my own. This is not an original scene from the show. This is spliced two different scenes together.
Kenjiro Hata isn't a stranger to romance stories, though it was largely a gag comedy.
So I think this is the part where I start working with the blur a little bit more to sort of match up with the camera. At the beginning, I wasn't working with it too much, because I really thought that this would have been a shorter video, but now I'm starting to work with the blur a little bit more. So you start to see the lines get a little bit more blurred. And the reason why is because, it's a little bit more blurred, but it fills in with the actual the depth of field and the blur of like the paper on the background. The only thing that I would say that I have an issue with now is that, like, I think the lines are too dark. I probably would have made it a little bit more of a gray, made it a little bit lighter, lower the opacity a little bit, and that would have probably cleared it up.
Hayate the Combat Butler was in effect a story that's kicked off.
Yeah, so we got 3 panels that I completely
Off by a meet-cute misunderstanding.
all doing different things and
Spoilers,
cleaning.
The story does end with Hayate and
Nagi.
Nagi walking off hand in
And
hand.
then slow,
And given that Hayate the
slow
Combat Butler
transition.
began serialization the same month.
So once again, right, it's very useful. Like these sort of like slow tracks are very helpful because what they do is they allow you to use very specific moments of the clip as a sort of tracking data, which I assume, yeah, I use probably one of the kanji as like sort of tracking for the camera tracker. And then once that is gone, that's out, and no longer has to track that. Now we start tracking the hands, which, once again, the hands, each finger on the hand is moving.
Pure love stories. And Tonikaku Kawaii is.
And yeah, so this is the song that Scrolls gave me called Mappa Goat, and I ended up just repeating the song like 3 times because it just worked out for the mood I need. So usually what happens when I request music from Scrolls is I give him a script and then I say, "Can you make music for this?" And then he gives me music. Sometimes I don't really know exactly where he wanted that particular track to be in or what it's for and so forth. So sometimes I'm not entirely sure where to put it. So other times I'll just use, I'll use music he's already given me and just repeat the track or something because, it's got the mood I want.
I mean, hell, eBooks Japan markets it as pure love, and it does.
Yeah, okay, so there we go. Yeah, so this, I believe, has been shot with the macro extender. You can see very clearly based upon the lines, the grids here.
Growing up together in a romantic sense. But its emotional battleground doesn't happen in usual pure love spaces. It's not like they meet at the school ground. In
Transition.
fact, it explicitly rejects that premise. NASA dropped out of school.
Okay, yeah. So this narration was cleaned using Lala, which is an AI cleaning program that essentially splits the audio voice from the backing track, and it's really good at it. It was able to do this functionally flawlessly, so I thought that was absolutely amazing. So yeah, that was what it did. I used to always just clean it out using spectral like cleaning, and it was always just a complete shit show. But no, this was perfect. It worked perfectly. So I'm gonna be using a lot more in the future.
And the story doesn't lead up to and end with the romantic confirmation. They're already in a relationship. The courtship doesn't happen preceding the hand-holding or the kiss. It's all a part of it, and NASA doesn't confess at the very end once he's broken past this TV drama stoicism. But my man just comes barreling out the gate.
Okay, I think NASA actually speaks during this particular scene. I remember masking this particular mouth movement out. I don't remember what he says. He probably says something like "boku ga," "boku ga kimi ga suki desu." Boku wa, whatever. But he speaks during here, so I ended up masking his mouth out.
The gate. It has all the energy of a pure love story. The first meeting, the hatsukoi, the ruminations. But it's all backwards. The text focuses on...
I do remember that I cut back to me, not because that I wanted to cut back to me, but because I felt like one of the... Yeah, I think what happened was one of the clips was about to cut to a different scene, and I didn't want to sort of mess up the rhythm of the clip cutting, so I just cut back to me.
On settings that are usually considered external to the pure love genre. For instance, once you get into a relationship, you move in together, and that's boring shit.
So this one is not the kind of like preset camera jitter that I normally would employ. So this actually is the camera. So this is actually the camera.
Right, you don't show that.
Okay, so this is a completely different style from what I did in the first few minutes. So this one here is just a hard cut. So essentially what I did was I essentially whipped really quickly over to the other side, but instead of manually sort of tracking the dots right before the whip, what I ended up doing was I just whipped and then I just cut right down to the actual motion blur of the whip itself, and then I go right to the deceleration. Essentially, so how it worked was all of the parts that I could track, I tracked, and then the parts where just in between whip, I just hard cut to a whip. Looks like nobody really had an issue with it, so I guess it all worked out.
Your Seo Koji, but Tonikawa
Yep, and so here we go. We've got Seo Koji.
It's all
this is probably one of the most. This is probably the second most complex cleaning job in this video. So essentially, in terms of general assets, we've got Nasa, we've got his hand, we've got his hair, we've got his eyes. We've got the background, which has been completely, which I ended up completely cleaning and redrawing. And then we've got Skasa. Skasa's got her hair. She's got her eyelids, which will move up and down. I use them as a mask, so I just mask them with the eyes. Move them up and down. We've got her hand, which was drawn a little bit behind Skasa's face. We've got her right arm, which is in front of her chest, because her right arm has to move up. So when her right arm moves up, it has to be able to reveal that little bit just right under the armpit. So that had to be redrawn and sort of put back to the bottom of the layer, so it worked out. And then we've also got her left arm, which is going to be the front arm, which is in front of the torso. So when she moves her hand and then she's running her fingers along along Nasa's hand, she has to be able to move that without we seeing the back of the shirt being all fucked up or anything. So the shirt had to be redrawn there. And so she's got the thumb on the bottom. The thumb is stroking the hand. She's got the hair in the back. The hair in the back is moving as well. This is one of those scenes where everything is moving, but nothing too garishly to the point where they're like, wow, everything is moving. It's moving well enough to give her a sense of body, I thought. Give her a sense of weight, because she's the subject, and so she's moving with a sense of weight, which I felt what the manga in this particular scene was trying to capture. Because I remember this scene. She's solacing him. She's essentially telling him, it's okay to feel vulnerable and so on and so forth. It's okay to feel nervous. It's something that happens a lot later in the manga. But that solace sort of is imbued within the sort of physicality of her body. And I wanted to show that by having her have these more subtle and deliberate movements, right? And so as a result, that's what I ended up having her do. I think it worked generally pretty well. It was a generally fairly smooth movement. Her eyes, I had her set on a completely separate layer just beneath the eyelids, so when she was darting, looking left and right, and so on and so forth, she was functionally tracking where Nasa's eye line was. So as you can see, her eyes moving up there.
Nurtured.
I could probably move the neck and the hair in the back there is all on a, once again on a separate layer. I could probably have moved her neck up a little bit less jerky. She sort of jerks it up a little bit more. I probably could have done it a little bit more with a sort of softer, more default ease in and ease out. That probably would have been better.
In which the relationship is nurtured. Domesticity isn't.
But yeah, I think it all worked out in general. I think, it was a good first try. It's a good college try. So, and then I had the two sections up here, and then, wipe in, and so on and so forth.
Is where they grow up. And you can see how the text often brings their ages to the foreground, like when they're going to hand in their marriage papers, or when they need to find a bigger place. These are, in effect, the things that adult couples should be doing. But they're still, reasonably speaking, children. And they're learning how to do it together.
This clip was an absolute nightmare to figure out how to edit, because the AI couldn't do it, so Lalo couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't edit it out in Spectral, so I thought, okay, what can I do, right? And I decided to just slowly crossfade in and out, because there really wasn't a good way that would leave the audio of NASA's narration clean and intact. And so I thought, well, I would rather have it clean and intact than rather have everything else cut out and it just be muddy as shit. So that's what I did. It was one of those unfortunate moments where I thought, well, okay. It was one of those unfortunate moments where I thought, okay, well, I want this part. I do like this part. I think this is relevant to my argument. So how am I going to get it in? How do I get this example in? And this was really the only thing that I could do in this sort of situation. So I transitioned to a tone shift. Hopefully that will like change the setting a little bit more.
And it's no surprise that it lingers for so long on the Kaguya imagery.
Yeah, the Kaguya imagery is really, I mentioned this before. I mentioned this in the video as well. The Kaguya imagery is very notable, and it's very noteworthy in the context of when we think about what we think about as the sort of elements of junai, this idea of pure, not only of pure love, but also of pure love that is pure because it never has to really wrestle with the sort of domestic life that sort of befalls its characters, that supposedly happens after the end of the story. After the story has, it's a sort of it carries a lot of similarities with the mentality of certain science fiction. Susan Yarbrough talks about it, right? Where the idea of a whole bunch of stuff just turned on in the background. So hopefully it doesn't catch that too hard. But Susan Yarbrough talks about it, right? Where this idea of sometimes science fiction has this idea of the clouds parting, where everything's destroyed and everything's all gone to shit, but through some act of redemption or clarification or understanding, the stories end when the clouds depart. So an example would be like, say, the ending of Akira, the film Akira, right? Where, so spoilers, in Akira, Tetsuo, yeets over into the other dimension, and it's just Kaneda and everybody else there, and then the clouds depart, and then the sunbeams come down, and you see the submerged 1964 Tokyo Olympic Stadium, all that kind of stuff, and then the film ends, right? And that's the kind of vibe that a lot of junai have with regards to mundaneness and domesticity with regards to their story. The moment that the hand holding happens, or they walk off hand in hand into some sort of other place, that's the romantic equivalent of the clouds departing. And so as a result, I think it's very important to understand the context of Kaguya. So if anybody has, if you've read The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter actually ends with, spoilers, it ends with Kaguya going back to the kingdom on the moon, and she had been talking to the emperor this whole time because even though she had casted off these suitors with these impossible tasks, it turns out that she actually found an affinity with the emperor. They had been talking to each other through letters, and they developed a deep affection for each other. But Kaguya has to go back to the moon, and she gives the emperor this elixir. And she says, okay, well, if you drink this elixir, you'll be able to live forever, and so on and so forth. And the emperor says, no, I don't want this elixir, because what's the point in living forever if I can't live with you? It's very, romantic, all that kind of stuff. So, he just casts it off, and that's it. That's kind of it. It just ends. It's a pure love. It's a proto-pure love story in the sense that their love is this pure, unshakable firmament that will never actually be tested by mundanity or domesticity. There's never any sort of cynical injection that occurs that makes this love corrupted or faulty. It's always going to be this sort of this halcyonic object that's always being understood with these beautiful rose-tinted glasses. And that's the vibe that a lot of these junai stories have. But, as I argue in this video, Tonikawa Kawaii, Tonikaku Kawaii happens, it has all of those same beats, right? It's this pure love that's never really, quote-unquote, tested. It's never really tested, and it never really runs into a major critical fault, and so on and so forth. And I understand that. I think that's something that a lot of people kind of don't like it as a result. But it is really important that all of this happens, or all of this sort of purity happens within the space of, happens within the space of domesticity and mundaneness. It happens functionally in the space in which these loves are meant to be tested. So it not being tested in the space where, for the most part, the fear of the Junai tale is that mundanity and domesticity actually test these places, sort of creates a very interesting inverted relationship as a result. And so that's what we're really kind of going with regards to these kinds of contexts, right? So, yeah. So the Kaguya imagery, in this sense, makes a lot of sense. Sorry about that. The Kaguya imagery is a very clear connection here, in my opinion.
As far as I can remember, the tale of the bamboo.
Yeah, so this is literally from. I think this is actually the only. This is the only part of the video that got copyright claimed.
Genuine romantic affection for the emperor.
So this is really funny. This part got copyright claimed, edits and all, right? When I upload my videos, I upload it onto my personal account, and then I unlist them and I put them on like Patreon for people who want to see like where I am. This video I uploaded completely. I uploaded the video onto my personal account. It gets copyright claim. I dispute it, and then there's like no. When I went to upload this, so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to upload this video on my Pause Select account, and I really don't want to change this, and all it is just I can't monetize it, so okay, whatever. So I upload this video, the exact same sections, onto the Pause and Select account. It gets copyright claimed, and then I dispute it. I say the exact same things, do the exact same things, and I'm just like, okay, well, they're going to say no, but whatever. It comes back, and then they say, yeah, sure, go with it. So Warner Brothers Japan just released the rights on the Pause and Select account, but not on my personal account. So I don't know what was going on. Yeah. So these actions, right? Catch a Charmander, take Buddha's bowl, retrieve silver branches, steal a dragon stones, take a shell from a bird. They're actually pretty close to what she goes off and has them do, and I think most of them die. Most of them die trying to do it, so she just sends these men to their deaths. It's a pretty ominous. It's a pretty ominous story, and there's the emperor.
Love that's never sullied by the supposed stagnancy of mundane life.
Yeah, that's the emperor, and then she goes back onto the kingdom on the moon,
but Tonikawa kawaii,
etc., etc.
Everything before flips that premise around.
This is just where I'm just talking about it.
To the moon. Her home is here. She finds her home.
Yep.
In this sense, Tonikaku Kawaii presents a different viewpoint. That the mundaneness of romantic life isn't something to be discouraged, nor is it something achievable after one has grown up. But it's essential.
So big shout outs to Hallimoon. So Hallimoon actually mentioned something, right? He actually showed me a few interviews by Kenjiro Hata. He showed me a few interviews by Kenjiro Hata talking a little bit about Tonikaku Kawaii. And I'm actually pretty close to what... it turns out I was actually pretty close. So that's nice. But yeah, Kenjiro Hata did talk a little bit about this idea of like we people are always born and raised, especially boys are born and raised to think that like once you're in the relationship everything is easy sailing and then you work and so on and so forth. But Kenjiro Hata apparently was like talking about in the sense of like, well, that's not always the case. You do have to kind of work for it. And there are a lot of little things that can be valuable and that can be found in working for it. I think the decision to not really show the bad parts of domesticity is very prescient in a lot of weird ways, because a lot of people might say, well, this isn't a real relationship that's being depicted. This isn't like a true to life relationship that's being depicted. It's an idealized one. It's a sort of fetishistic one in a lot of ways. And that is true in a lot of senses, but I think it's also important to try and understand why it shows this relationship, this mundane domesticity in this particular way. And I think it's to sort of reclaim or to reaffirm that there are parts of mundane domestic life that have largely been ignored within the Junai space that are really worth talking about. We don't really see a lot of Junai pure love stories, or at least stories that have sort of Junai conventions, seriously talk about the sort of good parts of domestic life, if you believe that domestic life is a good one, right? And so as a result, I think it is important to talk about it, in this sense, because everybody will it's always assumed that once you hit that domestic, that mundane domesticity, you're just going to be hit with nothing but tribulations and trials, and that's where your love is going to be tested, right? That's where all your affectations are going to be really thrown against the wall, and you're going to see what really sticks and survives. And it has a sort of siege mentality, and I think Kenji Hata, in some sense, is trying to move away from that perspective. I don't think I really expressed that particularly well in this video, but hey, this is just a short video.
Component of the romantic relationship. And thus, this is where its inversion occurs. It's pure love. Not just because some ebooks Japan or some guy says so, but because it's...
Okay, so this was actually a little bit of a mistake on my part. So when I said some guy says so, I actually had a whole bunch of Japanese tweets that were saying, like, this is a great pure love story. This is amazing Junai. I had a whole bunch of tweets, but I just completely forgot to put them into the video. And I didn't notice until the premiere. For some reason, I just did not notice until the premiere. So I think that this guy thing, it just looks like I'm referring to myself when I said, some guy. It's just like, oh, I'm some guy. And you know what? Hey, whatever. I'll just pretend like, it was supposed to be me.
It's about the same general ideas, growing up.
Yes. Okay, so we got Horimiya. So once again, we've got blurring. This one is with regards to the camera. Yeah, once again, this is just some straightforward camera tracking.
Overcoming obstacles and finding out where you belong.
If you see kanji in on the sheets, it's if you see me have these Google search printouts in Japanese and whatnot, it's not just because I'm just a weep, right? But it's because kanji makes it a lot easier for After Effects to track something.
Belong in the world and who you belong with. But that occurs dominantly.
Yeah, so this particular manga that shows up here, unfortunately I never talked about it. I do wanted to talk a little bit about it or mention it. And this is Ultramaniac. It's a manga that came out in 2002 to 2003, which has a very similar, or it has a very true to life Junai premise, where it's just about a bunch of girls who just fall in love with the help of I think it's Shinigami or something. I don't remember, but there's some sort of supernatural element. And once again, the story really just kind of ends once all of their relationships are completely solidified.
Your love stories have often undermined, ignored.
So one of the characters, she frowns and she looks that, and that was supposed to be she frowns and then she's like, why, undermine. What do you mean undermine? And so I wanted to sort of have it react. I wanted to have her react to me saying undermined, she's like, oh, who said undermine, right? But at the very same time, I didn't want it to be obnoxious, I didn't want to be like, oh my god, speed lines, I didn't want to do speed lines, that kind of thing. So I think it might have just came off as very a little too soft. I wouldn't say subtle, right? Because subtle implies that this is a very clear, calculated move when it was just me not going hard enough, right? I think it was just a little too soft. As a result, also, if anybody is curious, this is a very simple. How do I get the blur to match up with the blur of the camera? Because the blur put onto the images here match up with the blur of the camera, simply using a compound blur. I just used a compound blur on them because a compound blur will allow you to denote specific areas that are blurred more or less based upon a radiant, based upon based upon alpha channels. And so as a result, you can just set it to make it look, very much mimic the camera, and so you don't have to worry about it. You might have to finagle it a little bit, because sometimes you think, just mapping it out exactly like the camera's depth of field will work, but sometimes it gets really blurry, sometimes you're just like, oh yeah, this, you notice the lines is blurry at the bottom, but originally it was really blurry, because you look at the paper beside it, that's really, really blurry. And so it does require a little bit of finagling. It does require a little bit of hand, touching it up. But as other than that, that's all you have to do. Once again, this is all tracked. This was actually one continuous shot using the electric slider. So, anyone who's curious, this is where your Patreon money is going. You know, I got an electric slider, like on a belt, and this is how you get that really smooth movement. This is a completely continuous shot. There's nothing. Well, you can tell it's a continuous shot. It's just a movement. But there's no like fancy tricks. This is just a straightforward track, straightforward camera track on here.
Thus, in this sense, it acts as a time capsule.
This is, so I mentioned earlier that the other one with NASA and Tsukasa was the second most difficult or the second most complex one. This is the most. Hello. So a little bit of a snafu. I ran out of memory on my SD card because I forgot to delete some of the older files. So it stopped the recording. I turned off OBS because I didn't want it to mess up the sync with the multicam. And then I got it all cleaned up, everything converted, and then started re-recording again. But I forgot to turn OBS back on. So really sorry about that. There's no more footage, but thankfully it's only a couple minutes left. So yeah, sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that, folks. My memory card just ran out. The memory, the SD card ran out of memory, so I just had to jump back in there for a second there. So let's sync back up here. Click. Yeah, so once again, this part here, this section with Tsukasa in the wedding dress is the most difficult cleaning job I think I've had to do for this video. Probably one of the most difficult cleaning jobs I've ever had to do, because there's a lot of moving parts that unfortunately most people just won't see. So let me run through the sections here. So if you look at, my mouse is hidden. This is very unfortunate. So if you look at the, so the hair is on a separate layer, the eyes are on a separate layer, the eyebrows are on a separate layer, the front veil is on a separate layer, but it has to be on a separate layer from the shoulders, which have to be redrawn anyways, so it's all there, and then the back of the veil has to be on a separate layer. But because the front of the veil sort of connects to the back of the veil behind her left arm, that has to be on a separate layer, but that has to be connected to a null object that shares with the front layer, because you want to make sure that they're moving at the right pace. You don't want them to like move all wonky and whatnot. The arm has been redrawn because the arm has to be able to move up. So kind of like when she's moving her hand along NASA's arm, she has to move her arm up when she's carrying the bouquet. The bouquet is a separate layer. It's 4 separate layers because when she's lifting the bouquet up, you don't want her to lift it up and then the whole thing just moves as one continuous object. You want it to move as a series of segmented objects. So she moves it up and then like the leaves fall separately, right? So it gives it a little bit more of that weight. And I think this is really like the last image you see. So, I kind of wanted to have it sort of end on a sort of more nice looking composition. So, she's moving it up and then all the leaves sort of fall down. So you'll see here. So what happens here? Oh, wait. Maybe it's too early. Yeah. So if you look at if you want to look at the bouquet, yeah. So the bouquet, so it's very subtle, but you can see the bouquet, like the individual leaves at the bottom, just sort of fall down. And if you're a patron, if you don't believe me, you can literally just see it when I upload the PSD file. The dress was a pain in the ass to redraw. The dress was, I think, 4 different layers because she's got a very complex layered dress, but I didn't want it to move like one singular object. I wanted each layer to move separately, sort of wave sort of separately. So I drew and redrew 4 separate layers in the dress. So if you look at the dress, you can kind of see it, right? You can see it move like up and down very differently. So it feels like there's a sort of like soft breeze kind of flowing around, and that sort of leads into, so you can see the veil. There's a soft kind of breeze that's flowing, right? And so it moves the veil all over in a particular way that hopefully people thought was cool. But once again, after that has been, I think this was like 30 layers or something of stuff. But once again, after that has all been compiled, it just gets pre-comped, tracks, boom, very easy. So, that's kind of the situation. My arm. Very smooth ending there, Joe. All right. And so, once again, these are all the ending comments, all the little bits here, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, this is the Tonikawa video. It was supposed to just be like a very short video that was been done like in a day or two. But it ended up taking about like a week and a half of on and off stuff, and then another half week of like just polishing and repolishing, all that kind of stuff. I came back to this after the COVID stuff, right? No, not COVID, the Novid stuff. I came back to this after the Novid stuff where I was like working with editing other people's work. And so, coming back to this, I'm just like, okay, well, I got to come back to form. I got to come back to, the kind of style that I'm used to. So, coming back to this, all that kind of stuff. And, there we go. That's the kind of thing I've been, for Novid, I was editing around or through or with other people's work. But now I'm back to my drawing board. So what am I going to do? And so I ended up going with stuff like this. It's also very helpful for me because I can use these assets that I've already cleaned and redrawn and so on and so forth in the future in case if I need to, because they're always there. Can always just keep those assets, hold on to them, and in the future if I need them, I can use them. I can use them in any other context in case if I need to use them as an example or as a backing or whatever, right? That kind of stuff, because it's not like the images are just gonna go away. I can do a lot of stuff with them, and as a result, whatever. There we go. So that's pretty much the situation. So to run some context here, this video is the first of the Patreon production podcast video kind of thing. The audio version of this is going to be uploaded onto Patreon separately. So if you are a patron, you're going to get access to the audio for this in case if you just want the audio. I believe it also gives you an XML feed. So that should be it. I don't know if it'll link all of the audio uploads I have as one XML feed, but you should have access to that. If you don't, let me know and I'll do like a separate libsyn. Additionally, one of the things here, this is mainly a sort of generic selling video, right? This is just me talking about my own video production process. If you're interested in being a patron and live reactions are not your thing, you will also get access to this. So this is like the only public one that I'm doing. Everything else is just going to be for patrons because, hey, they're the ones who are backing my channel and they're the ones paying, they're the ones backing my channel. So I really feel like I should give them contents. And so, hey, talking about the video production process, which I'm always happy to do, right? I'm always happy to help out people like discussing video production, all that kind of stuff, trying to make content cooler and better and all that kind of stuff. Some of the decisions that go into it and whether they're worth it, because most of the times they're not. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoy it. And that is pretty much it. Peace.